Several years ago, a friend shared a parable with me that has become an important part of the apocryphal writings of the 12-step communities. So AA, NA, OA. And I love it. It's a bit corny, but I think that the parable captures what it feels like when we are in the grips of some negative mental states. And my guess is that every religion speaks on these negative mental states or obsessions in their own way. We probably are most familiar with the Christian lists of the 7 deadly sins, or the Buddhist lists of the 3 kleshas, which are sometimes called the 3 poisons. And these lists of unwholesome thoughts or actions are incredibly insightful when it comes to understanding the sources of human suffering: greed, anger, delusion. We see these all around, wreaking havoc in our intimate lives, but also nationally, culturally, globally. But studying a list often remains intellectual and doesn't explore what it does to us in the body, which is why I love this parable. It's about a woman who is drowning due to the weight of her own thoughts. So I've edited the parable for brevity, but here it goes, essentially this. There's a group of 12-step members taking a boat ride to an island called Serenity. I told you it was a little bit corny. And they were truly a happy bunch of people. But the boat had pulled away from the dock just as a few members on board noticed that Mary was running down the street trying to catch the boat. And one said, "Oh, she's missed it." And the other said, "No, wait, maybe not. Come on, Mary, jump in the water, swim, you can make it." So Mary jumped in the water and started to swim. But then she started to sink. And members on board, now aware that Mary was struggling, shouted, "Come on, Mary, don't give up. Drop the rock." With encouragement, Mary started swimming again, only to start sinking again shortly afterwards. And she was going under, and she kept hearing all of these voices shouting at her, "Mary, drop the rock. Let go of the rock." At this point, Mary became vaguely aware of something that was around her neck. It was like a heaviness that was pulling her under. This thing around her neck, the reason she kept sinking, was a rock of resentment, fear, dishonesty, self-pity, intolerance, and anger. It was, quite a complex rock. As many drowning people do, Mary prayed, "God, please help me get rid of this rock," while tearing at the strings that were attaching it to her neck. And eventually the rock dropped. And once free, Mary was amazed at how easy it was to swim, and she soon caught up to the boat, to much applause and congratulations. She climbed over the edge, but as she was doing so, she glanced to the shore and saw something. It's so corny, and it gets me every time. I know. She glanced to the shore, and she saw something bobbing in the water. And sure enough, someone was trying to catch the boat, swimming for dear life, but they were not making much headway because they were sinking. And just as they were going under, Mary leaned over the rail. She was like, "Hey, friend, drop the rock." Why does that choke me up? I don't know why that chokes me up. It's so corny. And I think it's I want to say that it's corny. Here we go, off the script. I think I want to say that it's corny because it's a way for me to not have to be right with it, right? Because there have been times in my life where, holy smokes, I know you guys don't know this, but I have at times been consumed by resentment, anger, and fear. Just ask me later if you want to know what that feels like. And I, felt like I was drowning in a profound sense of victimization. Injustice had been done, suffering had been endured. And on a certain level, it felt good to blame and justify and rationalize, but ultimately the rock pulling me under, And I've lived with a lot of unhealthy obsessions of the mind, or what the desert Ammas and Abbas used to call the harmful thoughts. And it could be that I value lists like the 7 deadly sin, or the 8 harmful thoughts, or the 3 poisons, because in a way they tell me that I'm not alone, right? These lists have endured because most people suffer from unhealthy obsessions of the mind. So if you're feeling resentment and anger and selfishness and delusion over consumption, you're not alone. We all are there or have been there. They are part of the foundation of the culture we live in. But most of the time, we pretend like these obsessions aren't there, and we hold up our hands exclaiming, "Why is the world this way?" Before conveniently pointing a finger and blaming those people as the source of all the damage. It is really easy to see the unhealthy obsessions of the mind in other people. The Buddha once said that anger is like picking up a burning coal with the intention of throwing it at someone else. But, the only real difference is that if we were to pick up a burning coal, we would drop it. But we can hold on to anger and nurture it even for decades. And this isn't to say that many of us, particularly those who've engaged in a good deal of therapy, don't know what the source of our rock is. We do. Many of us have overanalyzed ourselves to the point of frustration, and perhaps the frustration of our therapists. There are people who know exactly what makes them do the things they do. It's the overbearing parents, or the abusive spouse, or childhoods of poverty, or childhoods of affluence. Delusion isn't our problem, because we're also a culture of remarkable insight. It just is that insight is pretty cheap. We just haven't wanted to change. Every year a new book is published about racism. Every year we proclaim it to be the best book that's ever been written about racism. We make it a bestseller every year. But we've actually known what it does to us, to every one of us, for decades. The truth is, we've actually known for centuries. Thomas Jefferson, writing in the notes on the state of Virginia, says, "There must doubtless be an unhappy influence on the manners of our people." He's referring to the people who are enslaving. "Produced by the existence of slavery among us. The whole commerce between master and slave is a perpetual exercise in the boisterous passions, the most unremitting despotism on the one part, and the degrading submissions on the other. Our children see this and learn to imitate it, for man is an imitative animal. The parent storms, the child looks on, catches the lineaments of wrath, puts on the same airs, in the circle of smaller slaves, gives loose to his worst passions, and thus nursed, educated, and daily exercised in tyranny, cannot but be stamped by an odious peculiarity. The man must be a prodigy who can retain his manners and morals undepraved by such circumstances." Jefferson is not engaging in this passage in the horrors that slavery did to the enslaved. He's writing with insight into the horror of what happens when you create a white person, that is, a person with power over. They become stamped with odious peculiarities and depravity, having been nursed on despotism. And we have known this happens for centuries. Insight alone does not help us with our obsessions of the mind. A neophyte of American history must read this passage and believe that Thomas Jefferson rejected the institution and freed the people he enslaved, but sadly, we know the truth, right? He only freed 2 people in his life. He freed 5 more in his will, including 2 of his children with Sally Hemings. And he allowed 3 people to escape without pursuit, including 2 other children from Sally Hemings. In total, of the more than 600 people Jefferson enslaved, he freed only 10 people, all members of the same family, 4 of whom were his own children. This man spoke eloquently of his own moral depravity and did nothing. Insight into our mental obsessions is not enough. That said, I do believe that freedom does happen, that rocks do drop. And I do this, I know, because I remember exactly where I was when I forgave my father. I was on the corner of Woodside Ave and 55th Street in Queens. You know, my father's not an easy man, and maybe some of you can relate to having parents who are not that easy. And I was talking to a friend who said just a few words that set me free, right? That's how awakening actually happens. Something pierces the bubble of our obsession and the rock falls away. And sure, we might have been tugging at the cables that are holding it around our neck, but the dropping itself seems to be a gift from some other space. In this case, my friend, who just said he did the best he could with what he had. So simple. So simple. But somehow it broke through the shell of my victimization, and I could see with empathy that honestly his childhood had been far worse. He'd been raised by some truly broken people. And he'd worked hard not to raise me and my sister in the manner that he'd been raised, which does not mean he was an easy man. He was not. But he was not his father. And there was no intentional malice. He was simply doing the best he could with what he had, which wasn't that much. But it was more than he had been given. And here is where we should have some sympathy for our own mental obsessions and behaviors. You know, often the poisons or the sins that keep popping up were our best attempts that we could figure out at getting what we needed. You know, sometimes we had to fight. Sometimes we had to get angry. Sometimes we had to hoard. Sometimes we had to seek out affection where we could. We didn't know necessarily what our basic human needs were. And as a result, we didn't really know how to meet them in healthy ways. You know, Jefferson's insight is correct. Our children see this. They learn to imitate it. For man is an imitative animal. And some of what we are living with are just our best attempts of trying to get our needs met. You know, unfortunately, too many really, endure a great amount of emotional pain holding on to a pattern from the past, unable to admit that our way really just isn't working anymore. There's a cycle, right, of becoming willful, then demoralized, then willful again. And I think the UU Church has sometimes facilitated this. I have seen communities, I've traveled a lot to a lot of churches, and I've seen communities that have committed themselves to an obsession with the religion of our youth, clinging to a rock that just drags us, even if we won't admit it. I've seen communities that don't know how to identify their spiritual needs because they can't let go of the Catholicism or the evangelicalism or the LDS Church or the Orthodox Judaism or Orthodox Islam. Unitarian Universalism doesn't know how to thrive because it lives in the shadow of all of the religions we've rejected, or that we say we have, right? But who sit in the seat next to us, hanging off of us. A lot of people can't even tell you what Unitarian Universalism is or is for them, or what it does apart from being a refuge from the bad people who are out there. But I believe that Unitarian Universalism saves lives. I believe it saves lives. I believe in the parable of the short spoons. I believe that we learn to live and understand our needs because we feed one another as part of our spiritual practice. I believe that God is not some separate being, but an experience of deep mutuality found in spiritual companionship. I believe there was no way for me to drop the rock on my own. I needed another person. I needed something bigger than myself. The hardest part of this work is trying not to control it. And this is especially hard in communities of people who have learned very well how to control things. None of you. But we had to do this because this is part of how we survived. But it's only when I find the courage to allow myself to be vulnerable with you that something miraculous opens. I've always loved the line, "You cannot open a flower with a sledgehammer." Only God opens flowers. I am a flower that wants to open, and I find myself amongst a field of other flowers, each one of us helping the other to open. This can be scary, partly because the church was frightening to many of us as children. We don't know what will happen if we become vulnerable. And given that this place can sometimes feel like a pot of boiling potatoes where we are bumping against each other, why would we release our protective shells? It's our best way of getting our needs met. Speaking personally, because I want to be happy. I want to be happy. I'm tired of the rock. The many rocks. I want to be on that cheesy boat sailing to the island of serenity. I want to be counted amongst those people. I want it to be us. I want for us to be leaning over the railing and calling out to these people all around us, those living in the multi-million-dollar homes looking over the Potomac, to those living in the trailer parks behind Walmart on Richmond Highway, all of us the same. Calling out, inviting them to drop the rock. As I close today, I want to share a passage from James Baldwin, who, for me anyway, is the greatest American who's ever lived. He says, "There may not be much humanity in the world as one would like to see, but there is some. There's more than one would think. In any case, if you break faith with what you know, and it's a betrayal of many, 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 many people, it's there. I may know 6 people, but that's enough. Love has never been a popular movement, and no one's ever really wanted to be free," he continues. "The world is held together. Really, it is held together by the love and the passion of a very few people. Otherwise, of course, you can despair. Walk down the street of any city, any afternoon, and look around you. What you've got to remember is what you're looking at is also you. Everyone you're looking at is also you. You could be that person. You could be that monster. You could be that cop," he says. "And you're deciding in yourself not to be." lovers of love. We are doing the best we can with what we have. Yeah? And sometimes we bounce against each other. We have all learned some patterns and behavior that at one point in our lives was the best way to get what we needed or what we thought we needed. But it's really not working anymore. But ours is no caravan of despair. We long to be members of the love movement, not because it's popular, but because that's our religion. That's the teaching of this church. I know it does not take much for me to be that monster on the street. I come here with the faith that you will help me and hold me and keep me from being that. You will open my flower. And hopefully you will give me the honor of helping to open yours, so that we can be what we need to be, so that we can give to the next generation more to work with than what was given to us. Not because we were cheated, but because that's how evolution works. Love is an evolutionary thing as well. So let's drop the rock, swim to the boat, and then help others. This is how we learn what it can mean to be happy.